He thought it was just another calm evening. Pulling into the neighborhood, he worked so hard to call home. But before his keys even touched the door, a truck pulled up, lights flashing, not police, but men dressed to look like them. They stepped out with fake badges, claiming he didn't belong. What they didn't know, the man they were targeting wasn't just another black homeowner. He was the chief of police. What happened next would expose the depths of hate lurking behind gated walls and leave the entire community shaken. Marcus Johnson was a man who lived by honor. After 2 decades in law enforcement, he rose to the highest rank in his city, chief of police. To his neighbors, though, he wasn't a badge or a title. He was simply Marcus, the father who coached Little League, the husband who still carried groceries for his wife, the man who waved to everyone while jogging through the tree-lined streets of his gated community. He had moved his family there for peace. Wide sidewalks, manicured lawns, and the promise that his kids could ride their bikes without fear. It was supposed to be the reward for years of service, years of sacrifice. But in neighborhoods like this, not everyone saw him as just another neighbor. Some saw only his skin. The local homeowners association, controlled by a handful of bitter residents, had always been suspicious. Complaints about his car parked too long, his guests too loud, his presence somehow out of place. None of it stuck because Marcus followed every rule. But resentment doesn't need rules, it only needs fuel. And one summer evening, it exploded. As Marcus returned home from city meeting, briefcase in hand, he noticed a few men waiting by the gate in a dark SUV. Their eyes followed him with unusual intensity. He brushed it off until the SUV slowly rolled behind him. By the time he parked in his driveway, the men had blocked him in. They stepped out, uniforms that looked official, voices that carried authority. But something was off. No squad car, no proper insignia. Just hostility. And then came the words that turned his quiet evening into a nightmare. "Sir, you're under arrest for trespassing." At first, Marcus thought it was a mistake. Maybe they had the wrong address. Maybe they were off-duty officers, confused about jurisdiction. But then he caught it. The badges were plastic, clipped carelessly to their shirts. The patches didn't match any department he knew. His trained eye saw immediately. These weren't real cops. Still, they moved with a swagger, emboldened by the uniforms they pretended to wear. "Step away from the vehicle," one barked, hand hovering near a holster that was nothing more than a prop. Marcus didn't flinch. Years of experience kept his heartbeat steady. But inside, he felt a familiar burn of anger, not at the threat to him, but at what it represented. How many times had men like these used power they didn't have to intimidate those they thought were powerless? Neighbors peeked through blinds, some whispering on porches, phones raised to record. The men seemed to revel in the attention. "You don't belong here," another sneered. "This is private property." Marcus knew exactly what was happening. The HOA had grown tired of his presence, too proud, too visible, too unbothered by their petty harassment. And now they had taken the unimaginable step of staging an arrest, using imposters to scare him into leaving. But intimidation only works on the unaware, and Marcus was anything but. He placed his briefcase gently on the hood of his car, standing tall, his calmness a sharp contrast to their false authority. The imposters grew louder, demanding compliance, circling him like wolves around prey. But Marcus's silence unsettled them more than any resistance could. Finally, one stepped forward, reaching as if to grab him. That's when Marcus moved, not with aggression, but with precision. His voice, firm and commanding, cut through the charade. "I know exactly what this is, and you've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." The imposters hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. They had expected fear. Instead, they were staring down the unshakable composure of a man who had led real officers through real dangers. And then, in the distance, the unmistakable wail of sirens began to grow louder. The sirens sliced through the night air, each second pulling them closer. The imposters' confidence cracked. Their act, once loud and commanding, suddenly seemed flimsy under the weight of what was coming. The patrol cars pulled up fast, lights flooding the street in blue and red. Real officers stepped out, their presence undeniable, their uniforms crisp and authoritative. They immediately recognized Marcus, not just as a colleague, but as their chief. The scene shifted in an instant. The imposters, who only moments earlier had been shouting threats, now stood frozen, their faces pale under the flashing lights. Neighbors who had been watching in silence now whispered, realization dawning on them. The man their HOA had tried to humiliate was the highest law enforcement officer in the city. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. With calm authority, he explained the situation to his officers, pointing out the fake badges, the counterfeit uniforms, the staged arrest. Evidence was collected, handcuffs were snapped, not on Marcus, but on the men who had tried to strip him of his dignity. The HOA members who had orchestrated the stunt scrambled, pretending ignorance, but the truth was already unraveling, and in that moment, the power dynamic flipped completely. What was meant to be his humiliation became their downfall. What was supposed to drive him out of the neighborhood instead revealed their hatred in front of the entire community. The imposters were led away, their fake authority crushed under the weight of real justice. And Marcus, he stood exactly where he had begun, on his driveway, in his own home unshaken. That night didn't just end with arrests. It ended with exposure. The entire neighborhood, once complicit in silence, had witnessed the truth. They saw the extremes people would go to just to push out a black family, who followed every rule, who asked for nothing more than the peace they had earned. For Marcus, it wasn't about proving who he was. He knew his worth, his role, his power. What mattered was showing his children that dignity cannot be stolen, even when hatred tries to disguise itself as authority. The HOA faced investigations, lawsuits, and public disgrace. Their attempts to police, who belonged in the neighborhood, only revealed their own corruption. And though Marcus continued his career, respected and admired, he carried the memory of that night, not as a wound, but as a reminder. Because the truth is, this wasn't just his story. It's a story that echoes across communities everywhere, where bias hides behind rules, uniforms, or titles, where hate dresses itself as authority. And every time it happens, it forces us to ask, how many more families will have to endure this before it finally stops? So the next time you hear someone dismiss racism as a thing of the past, remember Marcus. Remember that even the chief of police can be targeted simply for the color of his skin. And if his story shook you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Stand against it. Because silence only fuels the next attempt. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and join the conversation. Because only together can we make sure the next Marcus isn't forced to fight this battle alone.